welcome back to Witchfix. It's been a very busy few weeks for me, I'm afraid. I've been sort of behind on some of my book reviews, but we're getting back into it now. I'm reading up a storm. The downside of this is that I have been reading some things which turned out, sadly, to not have witches in, but I'm going to talk about them anyway because they are connected to another book I looked at, and I'm starting to look upon this as sort of a mystery. So the books I'm talking about are books 2 and 3 in the Private series by Kate Bryan. I think the last review I did would have been the first book in the series called Private. Not sure if I'm going to jump all these up yet, but you know. I reviewed that one. I said that I'd read the back of the prequel and knew that it contained, mentions of black magic or witches, spell books being discovered by girls at a private school. I was intrigued. And yet someone on Goodreads said, you should probably read the full series before you read the prequel. And I guess that kind of made sense because prequels, they tend to be full of references to the OG books, which you're only going to pick up on if you've read those. So I soldiered on, and to be honest, I really enjoyed the first book in the series, Private. There were two witchy things that kind of happened in it, which were either witchy things or sorority hazing rituals. I wasn't sure. But I was intrigued. I was liking the main character. It was kind of giving me Cruel Intentions vibes. And I was fully enjoying some guilty pleasure teen reading. Anyway, so today I powered through books 2 and 3 because I am an unstoppable monster who devours YA books. And there was no mention of any witches in them. But I'm going to cover them just because if someone, read the first Private book, they might want to know if there's witches in the rest of them. And I can find no satisfactory answers online while Googling. So this is going to be your walkthrough of the series, but the books aren't going to get their own individual episodes because I feel like that's just pushing it. So we begin with Invitation Only, which is book 2 in the series, and I'm going to warn, broadly speaking, over the two books for mentions of sexual assault and substance abuse, which crop up quite frequently, as well as mentions of eating disorders, which are casually mentioned, I think, maybe once or twice. So all of that kind of stuff that tends to be at the forefront of teen fiction, it's in there. So where we left off in book 1, Reed Brennan had become accepted into Billings as a Billings girl, joining this sort of elite group at her already quite elite private school. And her boyfriend Thomas had disappeared. That was basically where we left off, and we pick up an Invitation Only with her having been accepted into Billings but still being hazed. She has to do everyone's cleaning and run around after them like an unpaid skivvy. And the Invitation Only title refers to a party in New York called The Legacy, where only, you guessed it, legacies to the school get invited. So 3rd generation up, I think, you have to be invited, or you have to befriend someone who has been given one of the coveted +1 invitations. And so the book mainly focuses on Reed trying to get to the party because she's fairly certain Thomas, her missing boyfriend, will show up there because he never misses this massive party. It's like the event of the year, and that's when he's going to pop up and be like, haha, fooled you into worrying about me, according to his close friends. So in the name of doing this, Reed is kind of flung into the arms of Walt Whitaker, which is so close to Walt Whitman that it really upset me every time I read it, who's this kind of neckbeardy nice guy type character. He buys her expensive presents and just tries to milady her into loving him. It's super cringy, but she kind of attaches herself to him so that she can get invited to this party. And then when they return from the party, spoiler alert, they discover that Thomas's body has been discovered. So he did. But she has, fortunately, at the end of the book, been fully accepted into Billings, so I guess something good happened. I read this book quite quickly. I was kind of excited to see where it was going. There was some mystery. I was really excited to get to any mention of witches. There was none. But then at the end of the book, having tested Reed's loyalty, the Billings girls said that now they could trust her with everything. And so I sort of felt like maybe we were moving towards easing the door open on some witchy secrets. But no. Which brings us into book 2. I mean book 3, but book 2 of the review. Are you confused yet? I'm really confused. Anyway, book 3 is Untouchable. And it basically follows the aftermath of the discovery of Thomas's body and Reed's kind of spiral into grief and self-loathing. Also, a third guy is now chasing after her. So we've had Thomas from book 1, we had Walt Whitman in book 2, and now in book 3, Thomas's roommate Josh is making a move. So Reed is like the original Bella Swan. She is just the tasty jelly bean that everyone wants a mouthful of, and I regret starting this sentence. Ew. But yeah, so she's trying to get it on with Josh at the same time as the police are crawling all over campus, you know, trying to solve her boyfriend's murder, or I guess ex-boyfriend's murder. And also, there seems to be a mystery going on in Billings. People seem to know a lot about what's going on. There seem to be whisperings. Taylor, one of the 4 important Billings girls who are meant to be her best buds, is spirited off before the Thanksgiving vacation and then does not return, and is allegedly in some sort of treatment facility because she's crumbled under academic stress. But it seems like she's crumbled under the weight of a terrible secret, like perhaps maybe what really happened to Thomas. So needless to say, this book is pretty dramatic. It does feel like kind of a slowing down, because the first book was all about getting into Billings. The second book was all about getting to this party. This book doesn't really have an end target. It's just, this is what's happening now. There's an investigation. And yeah, we're trying to get to the truth, but at the same time, there's no like fixed goal in mind that can be substantially like visualized. Like, you know, moving into Billings or going to this party. So it did feel like a little bit of a lull. Also, although Josh is an okay guy compared to dead Thomas the drug dealer and Walt Whitman, the 18th century town crier, is what I imagine. He's just kind of plain and boring. He's just kind of there and enough. So, sorry Josh, you're not real. So it did kind of feel like a little bit of a lull in the series. And did I mention no witches? Because that was really starting to become apparent as I was steamrollering through this third book. I have purchased like quite a few of the rest of the series, and I'm excited to read them. It's sort of a guilty pleasure type thing. I'm really enjoying the kind of glossy fantasy of it all, you know, these fantasy prep school girls with their newfangled iPods and fur coats and stuff. It was like, I hadn't really thought about when this might be set until Reed had to save some data from a laptop on a floppy disk, and that broke my immersion. So I think maybe it's just some of the sort of nostalgia factor of sort of harkening back to an age of my own childhood, even though I didn't go to a private school, but it might have been cool if I had done. So I'm enjoying the books, but the lack of witchy content is definitely becoming more and more apparent with every page that I read. And so I went ahead and tried to Google, like, what book is it where this stuff becomes relevant? Because if it's in the prequel, surely you can't write a whole series about, like, private school girls living the normal private school life and then randomly have a prequel about witches. That doesn't make sense to me. And the only thing that I could find was an allusion to the fact that Reed and I think some of the other Billings girls discover a sort of hereditary line back to the original Billings girls who like set up this whole, not really a sorority, but kind of a sorority. And that kind of follows on from the prequel, in that the prequel is kind of like a flashback to stuff that they're finding out about. I don't know if that is then going to feature in the story or just be kind of like a lead-in to the prequel. I am excited to get to that book. I forget which one it is the thing, which is quite annoying, but I'm sure it'll crop up eventually. I am excited to read the prequel, but as I said, I do want to read the rest of the novels before that, so that I can, you know, find the hidden clues and hints, if there are some, like references to characters who have since, you know, grown up and become the forebears of other characters in the book. So I am kind of excited for that, but I am going to have to plough through the rest of the series first. Although having said that, the books aren't that long and they are pretty exciting and pretty easy to read, and the plot is racing ahead. So I'm enjoying myself, but I'm awaiting witches with impatience. One thing I will say is that it's becoming slightly more and more obvious throughout the books, there's a slight undercurrent of not very niceness about Reed, the main character. She seems like super judgmental of some people. There's constant comments about the size of one character's nostrils, which I found weird. It's I think the character's name is Missy Thurber, and her nostrils are bigger than her character. Like, they are mentioned more frequently than she is. It is quite worrying. And also, she kind of is a bit catty about other people and, like, makes fun of them, like, for being vapid or shallow, when at the same time she's the one who's, like, panting after this clique of popular rich girls, accepting gifts from them and trying to be like them. So it just kind of seems like a case of the pot calling the kettle black. And also some comments and like the way some characters are described just feel like a shade off and a shade unpleasant. And I can't tell if it's just because the books are slightly older at this point and they may be describing people in a way that a modern or more modern novel wouldn't. But there's just like a kind of undercurrent of something that is making me slightly uncomfortable. Can't quite put my finger on it, but it's there. Also, I had to look it up at one point that Kate Bryan wasn't like a pseudonym for a different author, because from the way like a lot of the girls are described, like just hanging around in their underpants and their like silk negligees, having chats, and the amount of like lesbian stuff that's hinted at in the book, it kind of felt like I was reading a guy's fantasy of what private school for girls was like. I'm fairly certain it's not because, you know, I found pictures of Kate Bryan. And like she's written other novels, she is known to the public, she's not just like a name on a book. But it was just this weird thing that I couldn't shake. And it's not just the fact that there are lesbian characters in the book, because in Invitation Only we find out that Reed's new Billings roommate is an out lesbian, but her girlfriend is not. It's just the way that Reed talks about specifically Noelle and Kieran, the model and like the it girl of the whole Billings group. Just the way she's always constantly aware of what their breasts are doing in relation to her. Like whether like resting near her shoulder or like brushing up against her, and she seems to have like an inner shudder of pure delight. And it feels kind of weirdly homoerotic, and I don't know if that's like my reading into it or if that's what the book is saying, but it's a little bit strange. And Reed does not seem to be a lesbian from the sheer fact that she's had like 3 boyfriends in as many books. No shade, but she is still meant to be 15. So I'm a little bit concerned because obviously she has at this point slept with Thomas, and I don't think that's legal, even though he's also underage. I don't know how American law works, but in England that would be a crime. So that's a little bit strange and something that I'm kind of trying to work out why it's making me feel like weird and sketchy reading it. Aside from that and the sort of lack of witchy content, I am enjoying the books, as I've said, and can't wait to get into hopefully the undercurrent of witchiness, or at least read enough that I can move on to the prequel and have a good time with that. I think one of my original criticisms for the first novel was that Reed had tried really hard to get into this private school and then was flunking classes and getting embarrassed for not knowing stuff and still wasn't studying, even though this was meant to be her dream school. The novels have kind of circumvented that whole gripe of mine by just cutting out classes entirely. So now everything seems to take place in this weird hinterland where no one seems to like do anything but hang around in the Billings house, go to fantastic parties, or go to the cafeteria. They do not seem to be going to classes. Occasionally they mention like, oh yeah, we went to English. But no one seems to be like working on homework or reading anything. It just is all taking place in this kind of nebulous free time spaces, which on the one hand is okay because it's like I don't really want to sit with them in class and be abreast of Reed's academic progress. But at the same time, she's meant to be like smart and she's meant to be on a sports scholarship, but it feels like those two things have just stopped mattering to her that much. And she's more interested in obviously the murder, which I get because that's just, you know, dramatic, but in all the ins and outs of life of the Billingses. And I get that that's kind of the point of the book, and we're meant to be seeing her kind of develop into a Billings girl from her humble beginnings. But at the same time, it feels like it's happened really quickly, and I don't know how much more can change over the course of like the next 5 books. But we shall see, and I will keep you abreast if anything witchy eventually happens, so stay tuned. In the meantime, if you have any hints you want to give me about this series, do drop them in on Twitter, or you can send them in by email, which I eventually do check, but only sometimes. Or you can put them on Instagram at Witchfix Podcast. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!